And that way we can share it to you through our YouTube site if there's information you want to review later or share it with other of your colleagues. So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Judy Deller O'Keefe, and I'm our Public Information Specialist with CRTPO. And so I think this is really kind of our first MTP webinar with resource agencies to share with you the projects on our candidate project list and review some things with you and get feedback from you about the different potential impacts of these projects. And so we do have a lot to cover today. Neil and Travis are going to go through some examples with you, and we really would like for it to be interactive. So if you have questions along the way, we want you to just kind of jump in or put something in the chat so we can address questions that you might have along the way. And next slide, Brian. So real quick, something I guess we're all pretty familiar with now, but if you're not speaking, if you could just stay on mute so we don't have muffled sounds and background noises. If you're on your phone, please don't put it on hold. If you need to take another call, just hang up and rejoin us. Questions in the chat box. We are going to be watching that. I'll try to watch if someone does raise their hand too. And when you do have a question, if you could state your name and also your agency for us. I don't think everybody knows everybody on this call, so that way we know who we're talking to, and keep points clear and concise. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Neil. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Neil Burke. I'm the program manager with the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, and I'm also serving as the project manager for the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It's great to see so many of you have joined us. And one of the first things we're going to do is go through some introductions. So I'd like to start by introducing the CRTPO team. So we have myself, Judy Dellard O'Keefe, Brian Elgort, Travis Johnson, Jennifer Stafford, Bob Cook. And then we're also joined by Nick Landa. He's a consultant with RSNH. He's assisting us in the development of this plan. So what I'd like to do now is, in order to really make sure that this is a interactive webinar, we need to know who's all in the virtual room with us. So what I'd like to do is just to call on each person in here and just to introduce yourself, identify the agency that you represent, and let us know how long you've been in that current role. So I'll start with Javier Lopez.
Hello, my name is Javier Lopez, and I am president of the Steel Creek Residents Association. And with me, I also have a couple members, Carl and Dave, and maybe they can introduce themselves at this point as well.
Sure, that works.
Yeah, this is Carl Froelich with Steel Creek Residents Association, past president, lived in Steel Creek now since 1988. So I've been out here for all the new road development, widenings, and 485, et cetera. Very interested in Highway 160.
Dave Wiggins, been in Steel Creek for about 20 years.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. I'll move on to, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name, but I'll move on to Pat Kale.
Thank you, Neil. I'm Pat Kale, President and CEO of the Union County Chamber. I've been here 8 years.
Thank you. Warren Cooksey.
Thanks, Neil. I'm Warren Cooksey. For the past 4 years, I've been Director of Outreach and Community Affairs for the North Carolina Turnpike Authority. And before that, 3 years with the NCDOT Division 10.
Chris Matthews.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Matthews with Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation. I'm the Division Director for Nature Preserves and Natural Resources, and I've been with Park and Rec for 11 years.
Keith Sorensen. Keith Sorensen.
Sorry, what was that, Neil?
Oh, we're just looking for introductions from the participants this afternoon.
Sorry, got distracted. Yeah, my name is Keith Sorensen. I'm a transportation analyst with Charlotte Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Keith. Moving on to Eric Alsmeyer.
Hi, I'm Eric. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm actually up in our Raleigh office, and I've been handling the Charlotte area about 2 months now. But I've been working on DOT and other transportation projects for 30 years.
Eric Zavril.
Yep, Eric Savero with Sustain Charlotte, their urban design specialist. Been with them for several years and worked and continue to work as a noted neighborhood representative and in the past Plaza Midwood, Elizabeth, and South End. So that is probably about 7-8 years of neighborhood participation.
Bart Landis.
I'm Bart Landis. I'm the executive director of the Catawba Lands Conservancy in Carolina Thread Trail, and I've been here 2 years.
Bjorn Hansen.
Bjorn Hansen, Union County Long Range Planner. I have been here for almost 5 years.
Todd Paisley.
Yes, Todd Paisley, North Carolina Division of Air Quality. I work with transportation conformity, have been doing that for about 10 years. And I'll be working with the transportation conformity determination related to this plan.
Brett Baranek.
Brett Baranek, project director for the Carolina Thread Trail. Been here just over 5 years.
Jack Thompson.
Jack Thompson, executive director of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Historic Landmarks Commission. Been here 1.5 years.
Dana Stujanki.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. I'm Dana Stujanki. I'm with the town of Matthews, and I've been here for about 2.5 years.
Gwen Cook.
I'm Gwen Cook. I'm a planner with Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation, and I've been with them for about 15 years.
Kim Atkins.
Good afternoon. Kim Atkins with the Mooresville Downtown Commission. We're a nonprofit that promotes our core in downtown. I've been here about 12 years, even when Neil used to work in Mooresville.
Thanks, Kim. Moving on to David Williams. David, okay.
Yes, how you doing? David Williams, Gaston County. Work out of the Gaston County Manager's Office as Community Affairs and Development Administrator, and formerly the Planning Director of Gaston County. Been there for going on 26 years.
Stuart Basham.
Good afternoon, Stuart Basham, NCDOT Division 10. I'm the Division Planning Engineer for Division 10, and I've been in this role about 7 years.
Holland Young.
Hey, it's Holland Youngman, and I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I serve as a DOT liaison out of Asheville, North Carolina. And I've been in this position since October of 2020.
My apologies, your last name cut off there. So moving on to Leslie Willis.
No worries.
Leslie Willis.
Yes, Leslie Willis, Town of Davidson, and I've been here about 10 years.
Mike Reese.
Hi, Mike Reese, NCDOT Congestion Management. I'm the Western Regional Engineer, and I've been in congestion management for 18 years.
Loretta Barron.
Good afternoon, Loretta Barron, Federal Highway Administration. I am the Planning, Air Quality, and Environmental Specialist that covers the Metrolina region.
Heather Hildebrandt.
Hi, my name is Heather Hildebrandt with Statewide Initiatives Group in the Transportation Planning Division. I've been with NCDOT for I think 7 or 8 years, but I've been dealing with transportation conformity for over 20. So I'll be working on that role as well.
Bill Thunberg.
Bill Thunberg, Lake Norman Regional Transportation Commission, 14 years.
Wendy Taylor.
I'm Wendy Taylor with NCDOT Division 10. I'm the district engineer for Mecklenburg County and have been in this role for 5 years.
Donna Hood.
Hey, I'm Donna Hood. I work with the North Carolina Division of Water Resources and do 401 permitting.
CJ O'Neill.
Hey, this is CJ, Town of Matthews, been here 15 years, last 5 as Public Works Director.
Jill Vitas.
I'm Jill Vitus. I'm with the North Carolina Division of Air Quality Mobile Source Compliance Branch. And so I do the conformity reviews for the division.
A.H. Pittner.
Hey, that's me, Andrew Pittner. I'm with the Division of Water Resources out of the Mooresville Regional Office. I do sometimes work with Donna.
Suzanne Mason.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Mason. I'm with the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program, and I've been with the program for 15 years.
Joe Hummer.
Hello, I'm Joe Hummer. I'm the State Traffic Management Engineer with NCDOT Mobility and Safety Division, and I've been here for 5 years.
Todd Hunsinger.
Yes, I'm Todd Hunsinger, Director of Engineering for the Town of Indian Trail, and I've been here for 13 years.
Juan Garcia.
Hello, this is Juan Garcia, Senior Transportation Planner and Data Analyst for Gaston County. I've been working with the county about 24 years. Thank you.
Joe Hidencia.
Hey, this is Joe Hudencia, Environmental Program Specialist with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Work out of the Raleigh Central Office, been downtown here for about 6 years.
Suzette Morales.
Hi, everyone. I'm Suzette Morales. I'm with Federal Highways, and I am one of the Planning and Environment Specialists here.
Jason Wager.
Yeah, Jason Wager, Assistant Planning Director at Central Carolina Regional Council of Government, and been with the Regional Council for about 24 years.
George Hoops.
Well, I'm trying to unmute. Hello, George Hoops, Federal Highway North Carolina Division Planning and Program Development Manager. Been in that position for about 8 years.
A. Somerville.
Hello, this is Aminetta Somerville with US EPA Region 4. I work in the NEPA program office and I've been there for about 5 years.
Ryan McDaniels.
Hello, Ryan McDaniels. I'm the Executive Director of Lake Norman Economic Development and have served in that role for 8 years. Previously, I was in Cabarrus County.
Paul Chapin. Paul Chapin. Anthony Menzies.
Anthony Menzies with the Aberdeen, Carolina and Western Railway. We're the railroad that goes through NODA, east through Cabarrus County and Stanley County. And I've been in the role 2 years.
Tony Tagliaferri.
Tony Tagliaferri, NCDOT Division 10 Traffic Engineer. Been at DOT for about 5 years and been in this role for about 4.
W. Lee Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm W. Lee Jones with Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation. I've been there 17 years, and this is my 4th year as director.
Joe Geigel.
Good afternoon. Like Suzette and George, I'm in the Federal Highway Administration's North Carolina Division Office, Planning Environment Engineer, and I've been here for about 18 years.
Sean Epperson.
Hey, Sean Epperson with the NCDOT in Division 10. I'm the Division Project Team Lead. Been in this role for about 4 years.
Christy Brantley.
Hi, I think you called my name, Christy Brantley. I'm having a little bit of sound issue and I apologize. I'm the local government coordinator with the Historic Preservation Office. I've been in this position a little over a year, but I've been with the HPO for about 5.
Lisa Stywinter.
Lisa Stywinter, Director of Planning and Development with the City of Monroe. I've been with the City of Monroe for 14 years.
Jesse Fernandez.
Hi, this is Jesse Fernandez-Gotti. I'm a community planner with the Federal Railroad Administration. I've been there for about 6 years.
Great. Is there anyone on the call whose name I didn't announce for introductions? Okay, well, I know that that was a bit time consuming, but I think that was valuable. It really shows the different professions and levels of expertise that we have on this call today. It's really impressive that you all have joined us, and we're really looking forward to getting some input from you all regarding the development of our 2050 MTP. So here are the objectives for the presentation this afternoon. I'll go over brief overview of what CRTPO is. I'll provide an overview of the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and then we'll have an interactive roadway projects review. We'll look at a roadway project that was submitted from Iredell County, one from Mecklenburg, and one from Union County. We are a 3-county MPO incorporating those 3 counties, and then we'll discuss next steps with the plan development process. And we'll take any questions or comments that you have. I do want to emphasize that we are trying to make this an interactive presentation. And if we had it our way, we'd all be in one big room together having a really interactive discussion. But feel free to interrupt me or Travis or continue to use the chat box throughout this meeting. I certainly won't be offended if you interrupt me if you have a question that you want to ask. Next slide. So the purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the potential impacts of the 2050 MTP fiscally constrained project list. This will be a high-level discussion during this meeting, and we are requesting that those on this call undertake an independent review, specifically those resource agency partners. And that review begins today, and it'll be concurrent with the public comment period that we plan to open on June 17th and conclude on July 14th. Some of the evaluation considerations we want our agency partners to consider is there additional information or concerns about roadway projects within this draft list? Are there environmental impacts to draft projects that are not identified on the map? Existing or proposed built development impacts to projects on the draft list. For instance, you may know of a mixed-use development that is right in the path of one of our proposed roadway corridors. We need to know about that. This is the time to make us aware of that. And are there methods to improve the public engagement process between CRTPO and your agency? Next slide. Brief overview of what the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization is. We are the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for the Charlotte urbanized area, or MPO. There's over 400 MPOs throughout the United States. And they are required in all urbanized areas with a population of greater than 50,000 people. Our MPO's planning area covers Iredell, Mecklenburg, and Union counties, and we have 1.4 million people within our planning area. We are the largest by population of North Carolina's 18 metropolitan planning organizations. And I do want to emphasize we are federally designated, so we are kind of a creature of the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administrations. The purposes and responsibilities of CRTPO, we conduct transportation planning activities throughout the 3 counties and with our 24 member jurisdictions and NCDOT. We coordinate with regional agencies and engage the public. We allocate federal transportation funds to eligible projects, and we maintain plans and programs in compliance with federal regulations. On the right-hand side, you can kind of see our core plans and programs. We have the Comprehensive Transportation Plan. This is really kind of a systems analysis. It's not fiscally constrained. The next step in the staircase here is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, what we're here to talk to you all about today. This is a 30-year plan horizon where we actually take those projects from the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, prioritize them, And then we develop a fiscally constrained project list based upon available revenues. That leads into the Transportation Improvement Program, which is a 10-year planning document of programmed projects where it lists the schedule and the funding committed to those projects. That's a document that we develop jointly with NCDOT, and that entire process is overseen by the Federal Highway Administration. Next slide. A little more detail about what a Metropolitan Transportation Plan is. It's a long-range plan that establishes goals, objectives, and transportation priorities throughout the next 20+ years. It considers all modes of surface transportation as well as impacts to the environment, the economy, public health, and overall quality of life. The plan must be fiscally constrained, meaning the projects within the plan can be implemented using committed or anticipated revenues throughout the life of the plan. And FHWA requires that we update this plan a minimum of every 4 years. So in some ways, there are elements of this plan that are a snapshot in time, but the nice thing is we do revisit our assumptions and our data every 4 years. Next slide. An overview of the MTP development schedule. We kicked the plan off summer of 2020. We formed an advisory committee of staff throughout the region to help us update the goals and objectives, the roadway ranking process last fall. We held a kickoff engagement period, which I hope you all heard about, beginning in November and lasting through December. We held a virtual kickoff meeting that was attended by over 100 residents and transportation professionals throughout the state. That was in December. And then we're into 2021, and this is really the core plan development time for us. You know, we've gotten the roadway revenue assumptions adopted. We've gotten the roadway ranking process adopted by our board. We've solicited projects from our member jurisdictions. We've ranked them, and we've developed a draft fiscally constrained project list throughout the first 5 months of 2021. So we're within a week of opening a public comment period on that draft list, and that's really why you all are gathered here today to really make sure that you're in agreement with the assumptions we've made throughout these last 5 months. You know, following the close of the public comment period in July, we will take the fiscally constrained project list to our CRTPO board of elected officials for adoption in August. And then we will continue on with the air quality conformity determination analysis and writing elements of the report. So this plan development will really culminate with the anticipated adoption of the 2050 MTP by the CRTPO board in March of 2022. And that is a federal deadline that we were given. So we're working towards that adoption based upon FHWA's deadline. Next slide. So to talk about the key components, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Travis Johnson.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, so there are a lot of elements that go into making the Metropolitan Transportation Plan work. So we look at the goals and objectives of community, member jurisdictions, and the projects, making sure that the projects we're evaluating, they meet goals, multimodal goals, safety goals, you know, make sure that there's coordination between the different groups. And then we also look at different scenarios that can be happening. So we look at your land use plans. If there's a new comprehensive plan you're working on, are there existing plans we need to evaluate, you know, your unified development ordinances. We look at possible technology trends, you know, with the coming of autonomous vehicles, you know, scooters showing up. And also possible systemic change or seismic changes to how we work, like working from home quickly without much notification. So while we can't plan for everything perfectly, we evaluate the many different variables that can happen. And then we create this project list through this and make sure that all the projects we get are measurable, they have targets, and then the goals, then we also report out on where we are and how far we've gotten. Next slide. So again, the big difference between the MTP, which is in the CTP, is that there has to be money available to do this work. So we look at what money has already been obligated. We look at money that should be available and then we put those numbers together to kind of come up with our what money we can spend. So then we take the projects and we put them through a 2-tier process. And so we rank them with the various criteria and we evaluate them through a tier 1, get a short list of projects, gets them to a tier 2, get them through a list there, and then gets us to the proposed list which is what we are evaluating now with everyone. Next slide. And right now we're at that most important part where it's reaching out to you and engaging the public and engaging you to help us understand, you know, like, did we get it right? What are the elements we need to know about? So in order to educate the public on this and to take people along this journey with us, we created a website, the 2050 MTP website. We, you know, hosted webinars. We've been using social media. We created interactive tools like the one we sent to you prior to this meeting, and just trying to help as much as we can in this new digital realm. We have to run this plan and to make sure that the information is accessible and available, and to get, most importantly, your feedback as we create this plan, because this is like, all plans are not created in a vacuum, so neither is this one. So we need your help in making sure that we get these parts right. Next slide. So again, the process we evaluated, we tried to use, or not tried to use, we did use a quantitative and qualitative process to look at how to rank these projects and evaluate them. And so through tier 1, we looked at safety and congestion, and there was a certain amount of points that were available. So then we ranked projects based upon that. And then we then took those same projects and then added in the additional factors, and then added in new qualitative goals such as equitable access and benefit cost using travel demand model information to come up with the short list of projects that we think should be considered for the MTP. And so now we're going to take a moment and go through some projects with you. So I'm going to hand this back off to Neil so we can go through some regional projects.
Thanks, Travis. And before we get into this, I just want to pause. I know we've presented a lot of information to you all. Just want to see if there are any questions from our participants and our resource agencies this afternoon before we go through 3 examples. And we have 1 example for each of the counties. So hopefully you all are at least familiar with one of these examples. Maybe you're familiar with more. But again, just pausing for a second to see if there are any questions about our approach so far. Okay, hearing none and seeing no questions in the chat box, I'll go ahead and start off with our first example. This is a project in Iredell County. It was submitted by the city of Statesville. This is a project to improve a segment of US 70. It's known locally as Garner-Bagnell Boulevard. The project description is to widen this existing roadway that's 2 lanes to a 4-lane facility with a median and a multi-use path. The project limits are from Buffalo Shoals to I-77. And then for each of these examples, we've included the project ID because that's what it relates it back to the interactive GIS map link that we sent you all, just for easy reference. And just to orientate you all to what you're seeing on the screen, the map is showing the project and a project buffer. So you can see Garner-Bagnell there, beginning at the project begins at I-77 and goes westward towards Buffalo Shoals Road. There is another adjacent roadway project here that made it into the project list. That is Salisbury Road, also submitted by the city of Statesville. But our focus this afternoon in terms of reviewing the tier 2 scores is going to be on the Garner-Bagnell Boulevard project. And the map, you know, there's certainly a lot of different colors on the map that's kind of showing all of the tier 2 impacts that we're aware of. When we're through with these 3 examples, we'll open up the online GIS and we can kind of look layer by layer at specific projects if you have concerns or questions. So that's kind of an agglomeration of all the different data that you see there. So it could be a little confusing. So what I'll do now is I'll turn it back over to Travis, and he'll walk you through the tier 2 project scores for the Garner-Bagnell project and discuss some of the potential impacts.
Thank you, Neil. And so as Neil mentioned, we use this as there's the buffer, which is the white line kind of around the snake, which is the area of which we are identifying there could be potential impacts to something along this corridor. So looking, we see that there are community resources out there, there are historic resources out there, and that environmental justice resources are there too. So we know there's St. Mark's Church, there's a South Ray Street Local Historic District, there's the Cochran St. Church, And so we take this into consideration when we evaluate these roadway projects, because, you know, if we're going to affect a church or affect some environmental resource or something, that's going to add to the cost, that's going to add to the likelihood of the project being able to be completed. So through that evaluation of those factors that are on the ground is where we get the scores from. So the higher the score means less impacts it should have along the corridor. And again, this is all based upon the information we know. So if you have a resource that we need, or if you see something that's like, hey, why didn't you consider this? Or have you thought about this? We would love to consider that. We would love to get any information you can. We use the best information we had available. And so we're really hoping that you can help us think of things that maybe we didn't evaluate, or, you know, maybe you'll say, great job, you guys figured out everything. Probably not going to be the case, but hopefully, you know, through this process, we can make a best list we can. So again, as you can see, the historical resources, we gave it 9 points. Natural resources, we gave it 3 points, meaning that there are going to be effects. Looking at system connectivity, received a score of 0 of 10. Equitable access, received a higher score because, again, it's in the environmental justice district. And so you can see at the bottom, you know, adding up all these costs after you take into account all the factors, it gets us to a total tier score of 48 out of a possible 100 points. So at this moment, I think we'd pause for a second. And if anyone is familiar with this project, does this look right? You know, is this part of Statesville? Does it look like we've identified the resources we should identify? Is there anything you know about that we need to be aware of? Is there possibly a big project appearing somewhere close by that we should be taking into account? So I'm gonna shut up for a minute and see if anyone has anything.
This is Donna, and I live in Iredell County. I'm familiar with the area. I don't know if you've gone so far as to look at environmental justice and some of that as well. And I don't know, you know, how that would affect your ranking, but that may be something you consider in some of these.
Travis, if you don't mind, I can answer that question. So the first measure within the tier 2 evaluation process, as you can see on the right-hand side, is environmental justice. And that is data that we receive in a GIS, or a geographic information systems file, based upon EJ identified or environmental justice identified communities in the US Census. So we've certainly evaluated this project you know, a couple ways. The first measure in tier 2 measures kind of is there a negative impact associated with this project? Would we be taking right of way from environmentally justice sensitive communities? And then another measure further down the list on the right-hand side is the equitable access criteria. And this really measures the benefit of improving transportation infrastructure to allow for accessibility from environmental justice communities to community resources, employment centers, etc. So this project, as well as the other 106 projects that we brought through tier 2, have gone through those 2 specific measures that address environmental justice.
My interest in the GIS data is to ensure that you use the most up-to-date data you can. I've had some layers from different agencies submitted when people submit for permits that are outdated, and I would, just as a resource agency, ask that you ensure you use the most current and up-to-date information if you're going to pull off of the computer for stuff. That's all. That's just something I've come across.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate that comment, and I can only speak anecdotally to the age of the data. You know, that task was primarily handled by our consultant, some of the other staff members, but I do have confidence that they have pulled the most recent data for environmental justice, but also for these other community resource impacts. But we do have Nick Land on the line from RSNH. If he has any additional information about you know, the age of the environmental justice data, he can either put some information in the chat box or respond directly here in the discussion. I am looking in the chat box, and I do see a question from Joe Hummer with NCDOT, and his question is, what do the tier 1 scores look like for this example? I'm particularly interested in how you calculated the safety scores. So Joe, we do have, and I don't have those scores at my fingertips right now for tier 1 for these projects or for this project in particular. But what I can do offline is I can email you the tier 2 scoring methodology, or the tier scoring methodology, as well as the tier 1 scores for these projects. Before we move into the Mecklenburg County example, are there any other general questions about the process we undertook, or any specific questions about this particular project in Statesville? I do see a question in the chat box from Brett Baranak of the Carolina Thread Trail. He does ask, does equitable access criteria take into the account enhanced mode choice? And indirectly it does, not necessarily directly related to the criteria that we're using, but we're operating under the assumption that these roadway widening projects benefit more than just the traveling public in single occupancy vehicles. At CRTPO, we do have a complete streets philosophy that if we're going to go in and widen a roadway from 2 to 4 lanes, we're going to make the assumption that we're going to either add bicycle or pedestrian facilities if they don't exist currently, or we're going to improve those bicycle and pedestrian facilities to modern safety and design standards. So that is kind of baked into the tier 2 criteria, but just not directly within the analysis in that particular measure. Okay, moving into the second example. Brian, can you advance the slide? Thank you. So this is a little bit of a different project from what we were looking at before, in that the alignment doesn't currently exist, or at least most of the alignment doesn't currently exist. This is the proposed Western Parkway on the west side of the city of Charlotte, and it's a road on new location. So it's a road that doesn't exist today, but it's a proposed roadway connection. The scope of this project is to construct a new 4-lane roadway with median and multi-use path. The project limits are Billy Graham Parkway at the east to Steel Creek Road, or NC 160 at the west. And you can see the project ID there. And then I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Travis again to talk about the tier 2 scores for this project and the potential impacts.
Thank you, Neil. So again, looking at this project, it's dotted line kind of indicating that it's a new path that does not currently exist. So in doing so, we're aware we might hit a few more things because you're kind of going off a beaten path at this point. So looking at it, we can see there are community resources that might be affected from this, historic resources, and again, it is close to environmental justice resources as well, where the jurisdiction, where it starts and stops along the journey. So again, we can see there that the Steel Creek Church Cemetery is close by where this project is, so we have to be very careful of that. It does pass over the Coffee Creek Greenway, managed by Mecklenburg County, and also the Reed Park Academy. And so again, by looking at the scores, the draft 2 scores, you can see how the points add up to giving it 45 based upon, again, what are the number of resources is it affecting? Is it providing access for environmental justice communities to resources that they would need to get to? What are the, or are there a lot of historical resources that have a potential impact of being affected? So again, as we did with the last one, we also hoping that if you know of something, is there possibly a project? Because again, this being a new project, there could be large lots of land out there that are, getting ready to be developed, or there could be bigger plans for park or preservation space that maybe hasn't made it to the plans we saw. So again, is there anything that you can see from this project that we should be aware of or should take into account with this project? So I will pause and see if anyone has any additional things to bring up.
Thanks, Travis. I do see a comment in the chat box from Dave Wiggins of the Steel Creek community. And his question was, has the airport not abandoned this alignment because they're planning a shorter new runway? Are they planning to relocate West Boulevard only south to Byram Drive? And if there are any folks from the Charlotte DOT staff on the call that wish to provide an explanation for that, I mean, I only know about the plans for the airport in the general sense, a new runway, et cetera. But I will say that, you know, the Charlotte Department of Transportation submitted this project, and they have been in coordination with the Charlotte Douglas Airport, or the, you know, the city's aviation department. So I'm confident that they've considered the impacts of the runway expansion, and we're confident that there wouldn't be any type of disruption. That's my assumption for why they submitted this project to CRTPO. And then Gwen Cook, I see a couple of comments from Gwen. She says grade separation is needed on Coffee Creek to accommodate the greenway. And then also, is this road planned to be extended along the, extended to Carolina Crossing? So Gwen, this is a part of the anticipated Catawba Crossings project. There's currently a feasibility study that's being undertaken by NCDOT, CRTPO, and the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln MPO are participating in this feasibility study. And what it is really is to look at the feasibility of constructing a new bridge crossing over the Catawba River, linking Gaston and Mecklenburg counties. So this roadway, I think it does have some independent utility in the network if that Catawba Crossings isn't built, but this also would be kind of the corridor that leads you to the future proposed bridge across the Catawba River. I do see, don't know of road alignments, but airport is soliciting for the sale of the property to the north of this project now. And that's a statement from Jack Thompson. Dave Wiggins has provided a map to everybody regarding the projects at the airport. And then Donna Hood has mentioned, has NCDOT Division 12 been invited? And yes, we have extended the invites to both of NCDOT Division 10 and Division 12. So are there any?
This is Stuart Basham with Division 10. If I may add a little bit of information regarding the realignment of 160. The airport has shortened their runway. They reached out to us a couple of months ago. They're still in the process of working on their environmental document, and they're now looking at alignment that one that they had formerly explored a number of years ago. So this basically uses Piney Top and Byram now. So that alignment has been pulled further to the north, closer toward the airport, and is planned to use both of those roads.
Thank you, Stuart. Any other comments on this project, the Western Parkway project in Charlotte? I do see a question from Carl Freilich from the Steel Creek residents. How are new road projects prioritized against existing highly congested roads such as NC 160? Do these use different funding sources? No, the funding sources are the same. And I will say, specific to the NC 160 project, that went through this similar process when we did the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and it scored very highly. So we submitted that to NCDOT, and it is a committed project. So the NC 160 project, even though it's been delayed, and I know it's needed down in that area of Mecklenburg County, that's kind of a separate project. But to get to your real question, the connectivity measure within Tier 2 system connectivity addresses those connections on new locations. So generally, if you're submitting a project like this and it meets the connectivity requirements, it'll get some extra points. But really, they're competing for the same pots of funding. And one area where an existing roadway project would probably score higher is in Tier 1, where we are measuring existing congestion in the network and the crash safety or the crash data. That's all measured in Tier 1. So that tier one really gives the leg up to those existing projects that need corridor widenings or other improvements to reduce congestion. I do see another question from Jack Thompson. When I open our RSNH ArcGIS, historic resource layers are shown as on, but I see nothing that comports with the SHPO GIS/resource survey. Is there a training session we can get on using this GIS? And that's something we intend to do after going through this example, and we have one more example in Union County and Mecklenburg County of projects. We'll open up the ArcGIS and we'll kind of show you how it works, and we can address any questions there. And we're always available too if you want us to set up a separate meeting with any of you. We're happy to kind of talk through these different resources that we've been using to compile these scores for the MTP. I see a question from Eric Zavril. Do we have any projects that just reconfigure a roadway with little expansion, such as Eastway Drive from Kilbourne to Sugar Creek? This project looks large, 4 to 6 lanes with a median. Just adding a center turn lane and keeping the 4 lanes makes more sense. Plus, have you looked at the new intersection project at Shamrock and Eastway Drive? So Shamrock and Eastway Drive, again, this is another project that was evaluated, I believe, in the 2040 MTP. We submitted that for funding to NCDOT, and it is a committed project. So, you know, some of these projects have already kind of gone through this process in either the 2040 MTP or the 2045. And we do have some of the smaller scoped projects in here, but by and large, the MTP, this evaluation process identifies more of our capital projects, our more expensive projects. But we do receive some direct attributable funding from Federal Highway Administration that we offer to our member jurisdictions through a competitive process to really address some of those smaller types of improvements, the $2 million, $3 million improvements, just in, adding a roundabout, for example, or, doing some other intersection or small corridor improvements. So that's something that kind of happens outside of this roadway ranking process, but we do roll it into the MTP when we're writing the report. Are there any other questions about this project here? Otherwise, we will move into the third project. I do see a question from Javier Lopez, and we do have a slide about Tier 1 and Tier 2. Brian, do you mind going back to the funnel slide for us? So Javier, Tier 1, it evaluates the need of these projects. And again, we received 240 candidate roadway project submissions from our member jurisdictions. So all of those 240 projects were scored for the Tier 1 criteria. This is all quantitative criteria, so it's data driven. So Tier 1 is congestion, measuring the existing congestion levels along these corridors, the safety. So looking at crash safety data and developing scores based on crash severity, and then access to employment. So again, out of the 300 possible points, it's weighted more heavily to the Tier 1 criteria for a couple reasons. That really identifies the need, where the need for these funds are. And also Tier 1 is consistent, not necessarily identical to how NCDOT prioritizes projects in its prioritization process, but it's close. So we found that projects with a good Tier 1 score tend to fare well when we submit them to NCDOT for consideration of funding. And again, Tier 2 criteria, we're measuring the sustainability. This is really where we utilize that the Roadway Project Ranking Committee, subcommittee of staff from around the region, to help us with some of the more qualitative measures, like the environmental justice impacts, natural resources, historic resources, etc. The two measures within Tier 2 that are labeled red, those are more quantitative. So we did use the regional travel demand model to help us calculate the equitable access scores and the benefit cost. But Tier 2 is much more qualitative, where we relied on regional staff to help assist us with scoring those projects.
Great, that's helpful, Neil. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right, Brian, let's move into our third example here. So this is the a widening project on NC Highway 218, or otherwise known as Fairview Road, in Mint Hill. And this project begins in Union County and ends in Mecklenburg County. So the description is to widen this road from 2 to 4 lanes with a median and bike lanes and sidewalks. The project limits are from Brief Road to Rock Hill Church Road. So once again, I will turn it over to Travis to walk us through the Tier 2 scores and the potential impacts for this particular project.
Thank you, Neil. So again, looking at the Tier 2 scores, we can see that the environmental justice, it didn't receive points for that because it's going from a green to an unshaded color area. So that means it's not connecting to districts. Natural resources, we see there's an effect because of lower score with the historical resources, community resources, and equitable access. So looking at the map, we can see there the historic resource close by is the Longhouse. And then there's also going to be some effect to the Fairview Road Park managed by Mecklenburg County. And so that gives us, knowing these are within a vicinity of this project, knowing this is an existing, this is a widening from an existing roadway to 2 to 4 lanes, taking into where it's been placed gets it to a score of 32. So this is one of those projects where like there isn't much, or we have some information out there, but this looks a lot more empty of like extra resources compared to some of the other projects. And so these are the ones then we're really asking, like, is this really everything, or could there possibly something we missed? Because especially when you go to some projects and there's 15 points or something close by, and you come out here and you see a few points, it makes you wonder, like, I really hope we got everything. So I'm going to pause again, and hopefully someone can let us know if there's something we might have missed. Or if there's something else we should be considering as part of this project.
This is Javier Lopez. I'm still having a little difficulty relating the Tier 2 to Tier 1. With the Tier 1, a higher score, obviously for safety or congestion, I can see how that rises that project up. But here, let's look at historical resource, right? How does that contribute to raising the score? You would think that, hey, it's got more of an impact, maybe because of, like you mentioned, the cost. So would that tend to lower the score? If somebody can help, that would be great.
Javier, this is Neil again. And one piece of information I left out was the reason why we use the funnel, like kind of to explain it, is every project that is submitted receives a Tier 1 score, but then we look at the available funding for the different roadway tiers, and then we cut off projects. So not every project receives a Tier 2 score. So it's really only the projects that have a competitive Tier 1 score that we can afford move into the Tier 2 process. So there are some projects that were submitted by member jurisdictions. They were either too expensive when we developed the cost estimate, or they didn't score well when we were looking at the congestion, safety, and accessibility to employment. So we dropped those. So out of the 240, we did bring 106 projects into this Tier 2 scoring process. So I'm not sure if I'm conveying it correctly, but we kind of eliminate some of the projects that didn't score competitively, and now we're solely focused, within this process on developing that draft 2 score for the selected projects that we brought into Tier 2.
All right, thank you.
All right, I see a raised hand from Eric at Sustain Charlotte.
Yeah, just a quick question. How long or how old are some of these projects that are now in Tier 2? Were they all submitted at the same time, various times?
Yeah, so go ahead, Eric.
And if they are various times, maybe that might be helpful to include that in the scoring, or just so you know where the history. So in the slides here, it would be helpful to know how old these projects have been around.
That's a good question. So we did hold a call, or like a submission time for our member jurisdictions, our 24 member jurisdictions. to submit us projects. So that's where we got the 240 projects. So they were all submitted at the same time. However, locally or even regionally, they probably have their own history. Some of them probably have had a fair amount of study, or some of them have been on local wish lists for a long time. Some of them maybe have cropped up more recently due to new development or anticipated development. So they all kind of have different timelines, but we kind of measure the time from when they were submitted to us. They were all evaluated at the same time with the same measures.
Gotcha. Did some of those projects ever reoccur, like how you said you cut from tier 1 to tier 2? Does some of the tier 1 projects, like you said, that have long histories come back, in the future? That's kind of what I was getting to. Yeah, you're submitting and evaluating them all at the same time, but are those projects been around, and that time that they've been around, should that be considered in any part in the draft tier 2 scores?
Yeah, so generally when we draw the line between projects with a tier 1 score above, say, 90 will advance into tier 2. We don't bring in underperforming projects below that line. There's a couple of exceptions though. If a project made it into the fiscally constrained project list when we did this for the 2045 MTP, we did bring those projects in for evaluation in tier 2. But we had to draw a hard line at the end of tier 2. If that project continued to not score very well, given these measures in tier 2, we for the fiscal constraint element of it, we couldn't bring it into the list. And then the other thing is, if the project just didn't score competitively at all, there'll be another chance in 4 years for that member jurisdiction to submit the project when we do the 2055 MTP.
Neil, can we go ahead and bring up the map? We are at time, and I know there's a couple more questions in the chat box for you to answer, but if we could also go ahead and pull up that map too, and maybe even as you answer those next few questions, we might be able to point some things out on the map.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Travis, do you want to kind of demonstrate how some of these, or how this tool works?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Neil. So I'm sure everyone loved going through those last 3 projects. Well, I have exciting news for you. There are a lot more to review. And how we've done that is we've created this interactive ArcGIS online tool. So in order to bring up the factors, the resources that we're reviewing. So right now, all you can see is the outline of the CRTPO district, and then the lines that indicate the corridors of where the submitted projects are. So if you go over to the far left side of the screen, there's an arrow that if you click, will then give you the tier 2 ranking scores. So by the default, they're all off to stop you from being overwhelmed when you come here and you see a bunch of lines everywhere. So all you have to do is check the boxes to have them then turn back on. So as you can see, the screen is really filling up. So we can reduce that. And then the 2 ways to go through this is obviously it's interactive maps. So like Google Maps, you can zoom in and scroll around to your area where you're interested. You can zoom into your house, even if it's coming up close by you, just wherever you might have an interest in the district. Or if you're looking for a more systematic way of going through the projects, each of these lists here tell you the project name, category, what the name of the project is, and then gives you the draft score. And so by clicking on it, it'll then zoom in, show you the corridor. You then see there's potential resources, so you can click on them, and it'll give you a name. So see Rose Chapel there, Davison Church there. And so for all the resources that are clickable, so as you can go through the complete list systematically like this, you can just zoom in and zoom out where you feel is appropriate. But then just going through this list will give you a chance to review every project that has reached that draft list that we're asking for you to review. So if you hit a few projects and you're saying, hey, this would be great if you included this resource, or this seems out of date because I know this is here, or if there's an additional data layer has been recently updated, in the past, 6 months or a year, that maybe not everyone has access to. So any of those ideas, as you're going through this list, ideally, you just let us know about that. And just, again, as this list is ideally supposed to be that fiscally constrained list that can get built. And so if there are big factors that we have to consider in order to make sure it happens, like now is the time for us to identify it, so that way we don't get to that final list and then, now we know something's out there and the actual cost balloons up to where it's not part of, or couldn't be part of this list. And so, or there's an environmental resource where we know we don't want it to go this way, or just any other factors that we have to consider, because again, we're planning for those future horizons. So now is the time to help us identify what those resources are, what things we should be considering, and let us know if we got these numbers right, or if you feel like additional things need additional evaluation. So I'm going to pause for a second and ask if anyone has any questions about how to use this tool or how to turn on the GIS information.
And again, I would encourage you all to take a look at this, once this meeting is over, and try to break it, see if it is accurate, and, get in touch with Travis or I, and we're happy to set up a meeting with anybody to walk you through, kind of how we put this ArcGIS map together, and answer your questions. I do see several comments in the chat, and I do realize that we are over. I do want to make an attempt at answering everybody's questions. There are several questions about the GIS data or the types of resource data that we were using. And for those questions, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nick Landa and Ford Tanner. They are both consultants with RS&H that are assisting us with the plan development, and specifically they kind of led the data collection process for us to be able to evaluate those projects. So I'll turn it over to both of them.
Thanks, Neil. This is Nick Landa with RS&H. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for your participation. We do realize this is a lot of information and a lot of different data. Over the last several years, as CRTPO has updated their MTP, there's obviously more projects, more data available. So we've tried to do our best to gather as much consistent data as we can across the entire planning area. So we realize there might be very specific data, for example, within the city of Charlotte, that might not be available in other parts of the planning area, like maybe the more rural parts in Northern Iredell, for example. So one tricky part about this process is we are trying to evaluate a large number of projects in a short amount of time to make sure we stay on schedule. And we're trying to make sure that we evaluate them using a consistent data sources, so that we're not unfairly giving points to one project over another project. So I hope everybody can try to keep those parameters in mind when they're looking at this. But having said that, we were able to gather a lot of new data this time that was very recent. So the data that you're looking at, the EJ data, for example, is from 2019, which is the most recent that we could gather that's accurate for the entire planning area. And the other resource impact layers for natural resources, historic resources, community resources, is all from earlier this year, right before we started this process. So we basically were able to upload all that data into this database and then overlay the projects, and then put that buffer around each project like Travis mentioned, and have the Roadway Ranking Review Committee, which is a group of stakeholders from throughout the CRTPO planning area, including North Carolina DOT and representatives from the various towns, were able to look at this data in more detail, have some of the same questions you all had, and hopefully everybody feels somewhat confident that we did our best to pull the most accurate and up-to-date data. I can turn it over to Ford briefly And I don't know if you could pull out that panel on the left, and Ford can just very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, walk through each layer and just briefly explain where it came from and the year.
All right, thanks, Nick. So yeah, if we're looking at natural resources, that data, the streams, wetlands, water bodies, all that data is pulled out of the National Wetland Inventory. So we got that from, I guess, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and that was downloaded from their site. I guess all this data was gathered in March of this year, and so that was the most recent data they had as of that date. And it looks like their site is saying their most recent data was October of 2020. So that's where all of the wetland, stream, and I guess water body data came from. Community resources is made up of a bunch of different data sources. Like Nick mentioned, for consistency across the 3-county area, we tried to pull as much data from, I guess, statewide sources that we could, just so projects were consistently evaluated. We know that some areas like in Charlotte maintain a little bit differently, or a little more data than areas up in Iredale. So for consistency, we pulled most of that data from nc1map.gov, and we pulled out hospitals, schools, churches, a lot of those smaller community resources, parks, I believe parks and some church properties. You should see, I guess, the actual polygon layers, those, and as well as some of the cemetery data. That stuff isn't as consistent on a statewide level. So a lot of that is queried out of county level data and land use. So that being the most consistent, accurate data we had across the board for those resources. Historic are pulled from SHPO data. We downloaded that in March, end of March of this year. Both the point and the polygon layers. We are showing we only considered historic resources that were either on the National Registry or eligible for the registry. So the resources that are just on the I guess study list or survey list, the ones that were, I guess, removed or deleted as they're called, all those resources were not shown. So these are only on the registry or on the eligible for it. I think there's some local historic districts as well that are also noted. EJ is 2019 data. We got some 2019 ACS data, and that was coordination with CRTPO, and the CTP was just the most recent CTP database from CRTPO as well.
Ford and Nick, thank you for the clarification on those data sources there. In the interest of time, I do want to try to hold the rest of the questions. We do have a few more slides to get through. If we haven't answered your question, we'll certainly look at the chat and get back to you offline here. So Brian, can you go back to the slides? I believe there's just 2 more slides to round us out here. So the next steps with this process, agency review and comment. Again, we are asking our agency partners to start their independent review after this meeting today on the 10th, and provide us with any additional comments by July 14th of 2021. Those comments can be emailed to email@crtpo.org. We will be bringing this information to the CRTPO board next week in terms of the draft fiscally constrained project list, with an action request to open the public comment period beginning a week from today on June 17th and closing on July 14th. And then so we will be seeking the board adoption of the fiscally constrained project list in August of 2021. And then we will be seeking board adoption of the full 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan in March of 2022. I think that is the last slide. So we are certainly willing to stick around if there are any other questions in the chat or verbally for a few more minutes here. But I do want to thank everybody for taking the time out today to attend this meeting. And we received a lot of meaningful input. And again, I'm just really impressed with the wide variety of professions we have represented on this call, wide variety of agencies. So just want you all to continue to stay engaged with this this planning effort to develop the 2050 MTP, and we hope to hear from you soon. So Judy, I'm not sure, are there any other announcements or reminders we need to make before we kind of officially end the meeting?
Nope, you've covered everything. I just also wanted to thank everyone for, joining us today and participating. And Brian, if you could just click back one slide. The email was email@crtpo.org. If you have any questions, in addition to comments about any of the projects, if you have any questions after today's meeting, you can email us there. And I think you guys have all probably received a handful of emails from me, Judy Dellert O'Keefe at charlottenc.gov. So you can also always email me to reach out to if you have questions that we just didn't get to, or if you couldn't stay on later for us to have another brief conversation for those who can stay on now. So, but thank you. I appreciate all of your input.
Thanks, Judy. So we are officially adjourned, but I do see a couple more questions in the chat box that I do want to attempt to answer. Dr. Hummer had a question about let's see, I'm scrolling back up here. This is from Joe Hummer. How do you know that a proposed project will actually help safety? If I heard correctly, the tier 1 safety score is only based upon past crashes. My concern is that some of the widening projects might make the road less safe in the end. And I did confirm with the consultants that we did use crash reduction factors. So we're not only looking at the past crashes, but we're looking at the planning level scope of the project and using those crash reduction factors similar to how NCDOT, the SPOT office, uses those in calculating prioritization scores. And Joe, we will be sending you the tier 1 scores as well as the safety methodology. I did see a question from Javier Lopez in York County. How does their MTP feed to or align with their Pennies for Progress program? I know enough about Pennies for Progress to be dangerous. It's a local option sales tax that York County has enacted. So just like CRTPO, RFATS is an MPO. So they have to prepare a Metropolitan Transportation Plan every 4 years. And as part of their financial plan, they need to account for the Pennies for Progress program. Even though it's not state or federal funding, I think they do need to kind of bake that into their financial plan and make some assumptions as to how that funding will be allocated to fund projects. We do also try to align with RFATS and our Gaston Cleveland Lincoln MPO and the Cabarrus Rowan MPO in developing our MTPs, just to make sure that we're making similar assumptions about those projects that are regional projects that span more than one MPO. So we do have regular discussions with RFATS and our other MPO partners in the region regarding some of the projects we're prioritizing right now.
Thank you, Neil. Excellent answer. Thank you.
Sure. I do see a comment from Loretta Barron from FHWA. Her comment is, since NCDOT is using Atlas for GIS information, should you be using those data layers for the most up-to-date information? And I'm aware of Atlas, but again, I think I'll defer to Nick and forward with RS&H to see if that was an option in terms of just ensuring that we were able to collect the most up-to-date GIS data.
I can jump in here and I might ask Ford to back me up, but I'm pretty sure we looked into using Atlas, and I think it's more of a case of how the data is organized in that database. We used the most recent data we could, like we said, that we could apply to the entire planning area and easily overlay it with the projects that we're evaluating. But the way I understand the Atlas database, we would have to gather information project by project, and it's a much more time-consuming process. So I think I have that right, but Ford, if I said anything incorrect, please jump in.
No, that from, I guess, my understanding, that sums it up.
So maybe in the future, if it changes, we can continue to coordinate with NCDOT to see if it's available. But for this MTP, it wasn't feasible within the timeline that we had.
Great, thank you, Nick and Ford. And seeing no other comments in the chat box, I'll just say last call for any questions. Any other questions? I really appreciate everyone's time this afternoon, and I know we're past our meeting end time of 2, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, Neil, this is.
Go ahead, Dr. Hummer.
Yeah, this is Joe. How you doing? Thanks for the good answer on the safety. That's really what I was hoping to hear. One more question from me. The first project that you guys detailed there in Statesville, how do you know that's not just an interchange project? That in other words, can you, or did you do some sensitivity analysis on the project limits to make sure that we really needed to do that whole corridor instead of just the interchange?
That's a good question. So, we do a limited amount of coordination between, the member jurisdiction that submitted this project. In this case, it's the city of Statesville and Division 12, but just based upon the volume of projects that we received during an MTP development cycle, we kind of have to take the member jurisdiction at their word that this is, the corridor and the project limits are really addressing the greatest need. And again, this is it's a long range, high level look. It's not as detailed in terms of defining the scope as it might be for prioritization, but I think I know where you're going with this, in that maybe we should be doing a little more corridor level analysis when we're bringing these projects through the MTP. But traditionally, just given our staff and even the consultants' resources, to kind of undertake a mini corridor study for every corridor would be very time consuming, given our deadlines of trying to get this MTP adopted by the federal deadline.
Yep. And I haven't been in my job forever, but the ones I've seen, we're often looking at a case where 90% of the benefits is in 10% of the corridor. And we're kind of look at the rest of it and say, wow, did this really have to be widened? But the plan says it does, so we will. Getting the plan as close to the future reality as possible would really help us downstream.
That makes sense. And, that's certainly something we can look into for the 2055 MTP, just given the limited sources of funding. Do all of these projects, could there be some kind of incremental scoping of projects to address needs along the corridor rather than just considering a wholesale widening? But for, the scope of this effort, we kind of went with what the member jurisdiction's priorities were, but that's a good comment for when we're developing the scope for our next MTP.
All right, very good. We'll put on ice to them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Any final questions? Otherwise, we will go ahead and adjourn the resource agency meeting. Again, thank you for your participation. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.